So here we are in Hargeisa, Somaliland, and we're doing something unusual today. Normally, I interview people in interesting places, doing interesting things, namely being entrepreneurs. And today, instead, Zachariah George of Launch Africa, he suggested this. We've been traveling here in the Horn of Africa. He's going to ask me questions. So this is actually very important. It's surprising we haven't done this. He's going to ask some questions to get at motivations and why the heck I have this channel. So here we go.
All right, Adam, tell us about yourself. What's taken you on this journey from law student to academic professor in the United States to traveling all over the world, emerging markets, and now a best-selling author? Tell us about your journey.
It's a great question. Yeah, I'm going to try to keep it short. The backstory between being a law student, because you went that far that far back. I want to tailor this to folks who might have thought that they have screwed up so far. I thought I wanted to be a corporate lawyer, so I went to law school, and then I realized along the way that I didn't really find it that exciting, the actual daily work. And I also made some decisions that made more and more those options to do what I thought I had wanted to do
Yep.
less and less likely to happen. And I really thought I had screwed up. I even felt like a loser for a few years. I ran an education center. I ran a business. I had worked as a lawyer. I did have 2 law licenses. But, you know, here's the thing. I discovered I was actually pretty good at teaching.
Yep.
That's what students told me. That's what other people told me. At that education company, I applied for to be a full-time academic, and I felt I won the lottery when I got that. I then realized I didn't really understand the world.
Of course.
I'd never been to a factory in China. I'd never been woken up by a call to prayer in a place like this. Um, and I realized, wow, I've only been in the context that at best 10% of the world lives in. And if I'm going to teach at a business school in the 21st century, you need to understand the world. And you need to understand the developing markets where a lot of the action will be, where some of our students come from. So I started traveling a lot. I used most of the last of my savings to go to as many different regions as I could. And then I kept traveling as I was a full-time academic. And I realized the stories that I told would catch students' attention. And so I'd use them as examples of what would you do in this person's situation? How could you apply what we are learning in a law class to this person's problem?
Yep.
And then I realized, some of these cases started to win awards. And students said, it's kind of a waste here, only telling you stories to 30 of us at a time. And so over the last few years, the pandemic helped with this and that I couldn't travel as much. So I started writing the book finally that I promised to write and published it last year. It went to #1 on 7 lists, which felt like a bit of a success. And look, that's really a big motivation for this channel and collecting the stories for a book is teaching content, but also here's a big reason. People got back to me, including, once you're published something, people write reviews,
Of course.
and they get back to you and tell you why they like your book. And when strangers started commenting, I realized there's a pattern here. They like the stories even if they're not students. They don't care about law, even if they're not entrepreneurs, even if they're not travel junkies. They found value in the stories in that there was inspiration, there was guidance in how people in more extreme environments think, such that they don't give up. They keep toying with an idea to deliver a value, solve a problem. And so people have written that, I'm between jobs, and this helped me think about what to do next.
So tell us about the book. So the book's called Extreme Entrepreneurship:
Yep.
Inspiring Life and Business Lessons from Entrepreneurs and Startups Around the World. Tell us, for folks listening to this, what was it? What was the inspiration for you to go to these far-flung parts of the world, talk to these entrepreneurs, many of whom have never had a soapbox or a voice or a platform to have their stories told? You transitioning from this very academic world, this very theoretical world, into a world of on-the-ground practical realities. No one really wants to hear about Porter's five forces or about SWOT analyses, and you're now on the ground talking to entrepreneurs about their challenges. Tell us about that shift and why speaking to entrepreneurs on the ground, in their homes, in their factories, is important from an amplification of their story perspective.
You just really did a good job of laying out that contrast between academic knowledge and let me build on that. The first drafts, a very close friend of mine said, "This is good, but it's not great." And when I started including details of what it was like to actually arrive, and the look and the feel, and the taste, the smells, the details of what a place is like, the context that somebody's in, she said, "Ah, now I get it. I can imagine being there." And that's apparently part of storytelling. Storytelling, the chapters that are good, that people say, "Oh, I really like that one." They take you there so you can imagine the daily grind, and suddenly it's easier to imagine the problem of, damn, what would I do with this person? I'm trying to solve this problem. I have this great vision, but but it's but yeah, that's the thing. That's the value of actually going in person. To get at maybe the question behind the question. Couldn't you have written this book with video conference interviews? Yeah, I followed up. I might follow up with you with some details by email, video conference. But there's something about looking somebody in the eye and getting a sense of their character and their emotional state, what level they think and feel, and then to actually see the environment they're in, so you can better communicate.
Interesting question I got to ask you on that. So, you've probably done dozens, scores, possibly close to 100 interviews with entrepreneurs from far-flung parts of Central Asia to the middle of
Africa, South
Africa, South
America.
America. Have you ever, what's your general feel been about their openness to being interviewed, to have their stories being told? Have you had occasions where people have felt threatened that you're in their space?
Yeah,
Why are you doing this?
yeah.
Who are you? Are you just another, excuse my French here, but white professor trying to, write a nice sob story that sells magazine covers or articles? Have you felt resistance from entrepreneurs when you've approached them? Has it been
Yeah.
more welcoming? What's your experience?
That is a great question, and you're making me realize how lucky I am that I think it's close, it's pretty much around 100%. I'm trying to think of the last person who said, "I don't want to talk to you." And get that camera out of my face. Actually, it was in DRC that the former student I was visiting, Parth Chug, said at the end, we were both being candid about, what we loved about the experience and like what our apprehensions were. And he was like, there were moments where I like talked to people afterwards. I'm like, are you sure you're okay? Because that camera was kind of close to your face. And I'm like, oh, by the way, I have to sometimes because I'm worried the microphone isn't picking up the sound. But I can totally see from your perspective how that could be like a moment of, what's he doing? And he goes, no, the thing I was surprised by is that like they were all like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine. That was fine. That was fun. I'm glad we did that.
Got it.
And I'm shocked that it's nearly 100%. There's maybe one exception where somebody reflected and said, you know what, I said some things that I don't want people to know about because they might shut me down because I'm using loopholes in the rules to do something totally legal. But the big powerful business interests, if I'm open about the loophole that I'm using to legitimately legally provide a service that the market needs,
Yeah.
it's just cheap, affordable accommodation for locals and people without many resources when they travel. He's competing against big resorts in his economy
Got it.
that want to shut that loophole. So that was maybe the one situation where somebody reflected and said, I explained a legal loophole for providing a totally moral, ethical service that most people would say that should be on the market.
Yeah.
But the way I explained it, I just gave the playbook for the big, powerful business interest to shut me down. That was
course.
maybe the one time somebody was interviewed and said, I would prefer not to have that public. Otherwise, 100% of people I've asked have said yes to an interview, and except with that exception, they've all said later. And some of them even said, you can interview me, but don't post it.
Yeah.
Said, you know what? Post it. So like Mano in Sri Lanka, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. He was one of those people who said, let me think about it. I have apprehensions, and then said, that was fine. Post
Tell
it.
us about the biggest challenges you've had interviewing entrepreneurs from all across the world that have had difficulty having their story told. A lot of entrepreneurs that I've worked with have given us feedback over the years saying no one listens to us.
Really?
We are the forgotten the forgotten minority. Unlike the US and maybe some parts of China and India now where entrepreneurship is now something to look forward to. In many parts of Central Asia, definitely Africa and parts of Latin America, there used to be a saying back in the day saying, if you can't do anything, teach. And
I've heard that one.
and that's now, I mean, the 21st version of that is if you can't do anything, be an entrepreneur. Now,
Oof.
um, that that sort of myth and legend still exists in large parts of Africa. It's only now that the success of countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Brazil have made entrepreneurship a viable career path. Do you think that the work that you're doing, it is very challenging, but the work that you're doing helps embellish and dispel those myths and makes entrepreneurs feel that there is dignity in what they do. There is a lot of, I mean, the failure rates are high, but you in your in a tiny way are helping dispel these myths about what it takes to be more than just a survivalist entrepreneur in a third world country. What do you?
That is a great question. I don't know the full impact. I mean, you can see by my subscribers and views that it's not a colossal impact yet, but I think it's the beginning of a platform. I think it has the potential. It's like an early stage company in that the founder could give up, in theory, putter along for a few years, producing content that only a few hundred, several hundred, maybe a few thousand people see. Or it could build into something, and sometimes the growth happens faster than we expect, into a platform that does reach a lot of people and really does move the needle and really does have a wider impact. But here's something I've learned from teaching. You think from the outside, you must think, wow, that's kind of sad. You know, you're only reaching 30 students at a time. What, 2-3 courses a semester? You must probably come to the end of your career and think, you've only really at most affected a few thousand people, but really, you probably never affect anybody's life that much. And then one student comes back to you. I remember the first few times it happened. The first student that comes back to you and says, "Thank you. My life is different because of my time with you." In my case, I was lucky that a few have started companies that have had an impact, but they didn't even have had a big impact yet. The fact one person looks you in the eye and says, "Thank you. I'm so grateful because I could have done something else and I did this, and you had an influence on that." That's enough. That I remember thinking, I can die now. My life has meaning. That's not an exaggeration. To literally, I think I said to him, Jake Valancourt, if you're watching, I think you're the one that I remember most vividly now as sort of an early in the career moment where somebody started a company, Waste Hub. They advised companies what to do with industrial waste, and I was so proud. He hadn't even achieved the big things yet. I said, I think I can die now, or I can retire, knowing that my career was not a waste. So if you're out there and you're wondering, oh damn, my business, I only sell a few dozen, or one at a time of something small, and I'm not reaching anybody. This as a dad, you don't have to have 100 kids. You can have an impact on one, and it can fill your life with a lot of meaning.
So speaking of impact, I always ask this question to entrepreneurs. I'm going to ask this to you now as a professor and a writer. What legacy do you want to leave behind in your life?
Yeah.
Not just to your students or your family,
Yeah.
but to the people that love you and care about you. What does Adam J. Slukowski want to be remembered for in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, with the work that you're doing?
That's big. I think it's a great exercise, and I think we should all do it. So I would there's an expression, did somebody leave the campsite better than they found it? We're all temporary. We're dust ultimately. I'm going to pan the camera around because we're in a place where spiritual ideas come easily in a place like this, because we're surrounded by mosques, and 5 times a day we hear the call to prayer. And whether you're religious or not, I think one of the values of religion is it makes you pause and reflect and realize we're temporary. Each day is temporary, and then ultimately your life is temporary, and you're a pile of dust, or what's the song? Dust in the wind, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're on a campsite. We're here temporarily, and it would be nice to leave it in a better state than we found it. And I think that would be nice to have on a tombstone. And on a visceral level, what gives us joy as we're serving a higher mission? I love it. I'll admit it. I love it when my students are entertained, when they laugh, when I hold their attention. And I've been that way since I was an infant. You either have it or you don't. You either like being behind the camera or in front. I like it when people are entertained by a story. You know this because you've heard plenty of stories from me.
Of course.
And if I can hold your attention, if it's one person or if it's a full room, there's a visceral joy to it.
Have you ever been close to
Oh, and
what?
so
Yeah.
the fact that I'm telling meaningful stories is my way of entertaining and educating, maybe, and sharing stories that deserve to be shared. That to me checks all the marks. I'm not wasting my time. Hopefully, I've helped some of the people whose stories I've told either sell their product, help them formulate what's working for themselves. Maybe it has attracted some investors. Maybe it will attract some investors for them. Um, so I hope it brings value to them. I hope it brings value to the viewers in that it's enlightening, inspirational, and entertaining.
And
And
changes people's perceptions. I mean, one of
yeah,
the biggest challenges that I've had in the last 11 to 12 years, so before I came to Africa in 2012, is the major news networks. I won't name them, but mainstream media has had a very negative bias around emerging markets, but Africa specifically. There was, in fact, a study done. You may not know this. I haven't told you about this. So you're hearing it for the first time. I think it was in 2015 or 2014 where Time magazine did a study, and they did an alpha beta release of a magazine cover. It was a story on Africa,
uh,
and they had two versions, sort of for different audiences, completely a dummy controlled experiment. One cover had a picture of a scientist, a woman, an African woman scientist in Rwanda, with a lab coat developing something innovative. It could
yeah,
be a vaccine, it could be some sort of health innovation. And the other cover had a picture of a kid
yeah,
in a refugee camp
yeah,
somewhere in North Africa. That was just a cover,
yeah,
and the content was the exact same.
yeah.
And no prizes for guessing how many copies sold of the first version versus the second version by a factor of 10 to 1.
No.
The one that had the negative story of poverty-stricken, disease-stricken Africa
Yeah.
sold significantly more, 10 times more copies than the one that had a story with the positive spin. So I think part of the work that pioneers like yourself do is dispel that myth around negative bias, confirmation bias. And that's why the work you do should be amplified, not just through your book, but through your supporters, your believers, your founders, your entrepreneurs, confirming that what you see on the ground is not what you see on the telly.
Yeah.
And it's not led by sponsors or large corporates that have to tell a particular story.
Yeah.
But given that you're in that situation,
Yeah.
it must be challenging. It cannot be all hunky dory.
No.
It is. Have you ever felt like quitting, stopping? That's one. How do you pick yourself up
Yeah.
when you travel all over the world? What is it now? 130, 140
Somewhere
countries?
between 130. I need to
140
recount.
countries.
Getting close to
How do
140.
you ever feel down, depressed, want to give up? Which
Yeah.
I'm sure you do. And question number two: how do you pick yourself up, and what keeps you going?
Great questions. Thank you for sharing that about that. There's an expression in news: if it bleeds, it leads. Because we seem to be drawn. It's a weird tendency, isn't it, that we are drawn to negative stories. To answer your question about how I pick myself up and are there down moments? Yes, there are hard moments, and you can tell by my voice that I sometimes push it too far in terms of physical exertion. We both like to exercise. We're both passionate about seeing places, and sometimes you need to pause for self-care. We've talked about this, and it's actually one of the things I asked you. How do you live like what seems like 5 lifetimes of work? Plus, you have your dad, and you have. I found out you sing. You have a musical hobby, and he said the same thing. Well, you got to carve out some time to keep it sacred for taking care of yourself and your passion projects that keep you alive and motivated. And so the answer is that the down moments are when. Yeah, I don't want to paint an image that everything's hunky dory. You go to some places and look. Let's be real. They can be dusty, dirty, and you're asking yourself, I could be in a much nicer place. And you try to remind yourself, yeah, but this is somebody else's daily reality. Don't judge the whole place.
That's such a good point.
And this is part of why you're here is to get out of your privilege and your comfort and get closer to the daily reality that most of the planet lives in. It's not your office outside of Boston, Massachusetts. That's not reality for most of humanity. And that was the original impetus. You got to remind yourself, I don't want to make any analogies to people that were much smarter and better humans, but the Buddha did not acquire wisdom by staying in the palace as a prince.
Yep.
He got left behind the palace, left behind the privilege, and maybe in my own tiny small way, I really, again, to emphasize, I'm not comparing myself to Buddha or a Bodhisattva or whatever,
Yeah.
but in the same way, step out of your comfort zone. If that's another cliche, but to make it real and maybe refresh it. Yeah, no, it's a good thing. If you wake up and you realize you put yourself in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, maybe not even fully safe, and you don't know where you're going, and you're tired, and it's dirty, and you're losing your voice, good. You wanted to push the limits. You wanted to get out of your comfort. You wanted to find out somebody else's reality. Yeah, I am a white middle-aged male with a lot of privilege. So now what am I going to do with it? Would people, if you're a hater, would you prefer I stay in my office and write another law article with 300 footnotes that maybe a bunch of other academics read? That's a good question to ask yourself. What's the alternative? And there might be some alternatives that bring you comfort today, but are they meaningful? You've done that. So I think it's better especially if you do have the bandwidth and you have the ability to get out of your comfort zone. It doesn't have to be going to the other side of the world. Do something new. Do something that challenges your perspective. And when you do get burnt out, when you do lose your voice, we've been you've watched it. I do try to catch up on sleep. I've learned to also pace things so that there are breaks where there's time for rest and relaxation. Some people would say, no, a weekend's not enough, dude. You need a little bit more. But those are some answers to your question. And I'm still working on it. Still a work in progress. I still have not perfected self-care, but I think that's something to work on. And you've emphasized that it's something to look for in an entrepreneur, somebody who is insanely ambitious, insanely hardworking, but has the capacity to also check themselves so they don't burn out.
That's amazing. I think to sort of wrap up, and a very important point you bring up for our listeners is the difference between essentially sympathy and empathy. They're not the same thing. So sympathy is when you feel sorry for someone. Oh gosh, you live in Hargeisa, you live in Djibouti, you live in Cote d'Ivoire or in Mali or somewhere in Nepal.
Or a conflict zone.
On conflict zone, and woe's you, I feel sorry for you, how can I help you? Versus empathy, where you're saying, what's it like to walk a day in your shoes?
Yeah.
To have a meal a day and to struggle with...
Exactly. Eat the same food, drink the same tea or chai. Maybe I'm not going to say have a smoke with somebody. I don't want to endorse that.
Yep.
But yeah, walk in their shoes, breathe the same air, drink the same, eat the same, maybe stay in the same place. And
that is a message for anyone here that is probably working for an NGO or a governmental agency or a large corporate, saying, gosh, let's stop feeling sorry for entrepreneurs and small businesses in emerging markets, and rather understand, make the time, effort, and resources to see what it's like to do what they do. Because remember this, ultimately global supply chains control how everything is produced. So for someone sleeping on a cushy bed in Boston, Massachusetts, there was someone that was picking cotton somewhere in North Africa that, for pennies for their time, to help build that. So ultimately, if you don't understand what makes global supply chain so efficient, you're doing yourself a big disservice. So empathy is what should drive your willingness to do good and have an impact versus just feeling sorry for people. And I think that's something that all of us can learn, and folks like Adam here are at the forefront of doing that.
Well, two more things that I want to build on. There's an expression in comedy that you never negate what the other person has just offered up on stage. You always do a yes and. I think if you do stand-up comedy, correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to yes and you. Yeah, some places, I think you said, look like they would be rough. And they can be, especially at first glance. But then you realize, I want to slightly tweak that. We're here, somebody hosting us is named Saeed, and he shared something that on his first visits here to Somaliland, he actually felt more relaxed and at ease and better than in the UK.
Yep.
Who would have guessed that in what the world still thinks of as part of Somalia, because Somaliland is not recognized even this country by most or all of other countries, that here, where some of us would show up and see dusty, bumpy roads instead of nice pavement, it actually looks nice on camera, but people might assume that some places, are dusty and unpleasant, and then you realize, and Saeed is living proof, some people move back or find something here satisfying that they don't have in more comfortable places. And it might have to do with, for example, a wider family network, a more supportive network of relationships, and a lifestyle and food that they think is somehow they find more comfortable. So you can't write off some places as being inherently miserable. And there's even been, I've heard from people that, in the midst sometimes of even the worst that you can imagine, they did find a sense of meaning that is sometimes missing. I've even heard soldiers say this, and I don't want to blanket statement about their context, I don't know it as well. But that sense that even in the most tense moments, or the most moments where people would think that must be horrible, they were like, well, that's where I've seen the most beautiful of people's character emerge, and there was meaning and actual beauty in it. I think I'm quoting Jocko Willink that being in a conflict zone can bring out the absolute worst in humanity, but you can also see the best and most beautiful. I never thought I'd quote Jocko Willink for like spiritual wisdom about why we shouldn't judge other contexts as inherently bad or worse, but rather different, and you'll see and appreciate different things in humanity. I also want to yes and you on something. My God, I should have led with this. The one objection I heard this year is, wait, are you traveling? And this, they said, are you telling people what to do? Are you the one spouting wisdom? I said, oh my God, no, I'm the idiot coming from another context that doesn't understand this place. Explain it to me and explain your wisdom, because you're functioning here. You're making something work where I think I would have run away and given up. So you must have wisdom, and they often do have wisdom. Wisdom that's sometimes a surprise. Not every interview is oh my God, what a revelation. But oftentimes there's wisdom that these people have that we don't have. They're making things work in a place where most of us wouldn't know where to begin, and we can learn from that. And so, unlike this interview where you're asking me questions and allowing me to say stuff, I try to ask and shut up. And maybe that's why I enjoy it. It gets me out of myself also. But the focus is on getting wisdom and sharing wisdom from these folks, and they seem to enjoy it so far. I hope you have, if you're an interviewee. There's one more thing to emphasize, and that is when I've talked with people about doing video, people that have worked in video production have said, this is a true story, they said, why don't you gamify this, and why don't you visit these places and have it like a contest, like a Shark Tank thing, where they pitch and you judge which is the best one, and then you give them money. Or you come and visit with students and give them advice. And I'm like, wait a second, so we parachute into a context that we don't understand, and we're supposed to dispense advice to people that live there? You're smiling, and we've talked about also the fact that, there are places I've visited where organizations work there, and their analysts or the people that do the fundraising or planning, so I've been told, have not visited the context. And they're making decisions on the other side of the planet about things, and they might not have been there on the ground and seen what their organization does. And I don't want to badmouth anybody, but if anybody's wondering what the value is of physically being somewhere, it is sometimes to get the sense of wisdom that the person might have that you might not get from remotely, asking questions because you don't even understand the context, you haven't even seen it, and so you don't know what questions to ask. It is a way of hearing them, giving them a platform to share their wisdom.
Yep.
And to those who think that I'm in a position to give advice to anybody, no, I consider myself just a conduit for hopefully finding good stories, wisdom, and sharing it, and maybe it'll do some good. And it sure as heck is fun and a privilege to be able to do it in any way. As long as I can do it, I'll try to keep doing it.
That's fantastic. What an absolute pleasure.
And I would be remiss not to say, similarly, you are in that category of people that is doing stuff that I would have balked from doing. To ask a lot of people for a lot of money to invest in a lot of other companies that are not yet completely 100% certain bets. Some of them are going to do great. Not all might. That is brave, and you must have learned. I feel like we've barely scraped the surface. And all the interviews, I'm starting to catch up on interviews that you've done with other people. You must have accumulated lifetimes of wisdom. So much respect for what you're doing, and thank you
Of
for
course,
even
thank
the
you.
idea that you'd ask me questions for whatever I might have to share. Thank you for that idea.
Fantastic. What a pleasure, Adam. Thanks again, everyone.
Yep.
And signing out from beautiful Hargeisa in Somaliland, the Horn of Africa.
Everybody should visit. It's much. Everybody, look. Let's be real. People thought that it's not safe, and they were like, "Are you sure you want to go there? Oh my God, is it safe?" Look, Somalia, the rest of the country has some issues right now. You might want to do your own research. Somaliland, I feel comfortable saying on camera. What a pleasure to arrive at the airport. The Wi-Fi works right away. It's really fast. The people are friendly. The food is great, and it's an underappreciated corner of the world. And we are actually looking forward to coming back.
Correct.
So on that note, we will sign off. And yeah, goodbye from Hargeisa. Hope I'm saying it right. Hargeisa. Hargeisa. So I'll just pan around one more time.